The morning sun painted golden streaks across Maple Street as Mrs. Rose Chen walked her usual path to the corner store. At 75, she had lived in this neighborhood long enough to watch trees grow from saplings to shade-giving giants. Her arthritic hands clutched her worn leather purse, a gift from her late husband, as she made her way down the familiar sidewalk. Just as she was about to push open the store's glass door, something made her freeze. Through the slightly dusty window, past the OPN sign with its flickering neon light, she saw a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, standing on his tiptoes, carefully arranging oranges in a perfect pyramid. His small dark hands moved with surprising precision, turning each fruit so its most beautiful side faced outward. Rose's heart skipped a beat, then another. The way the boy's tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, the careful way he handled each piece of fruit, it was exactly how her Anthony used to do it 40 years ago in their family store. The same store that Anthony had used as a stepping stone to build his tech empire. She watched, transfixed, as the boy caught an orange that nearly rolled off the display. Instead of simply putting it back, he studied the structure of his pyramid, then carefully rebalanced the whole thing. Just like Anthony used to. Even the way he stepped back to admire his work, hands on his hips, head tilted slightly to the right. It was like watching a color video of her son's childhood in black and white. The world around Rose seemed to fade away. The morning traffic, the chatter of passing schoolchildren, even the bark of Mrs. Thompson's annoying chihuahua. All of it disappeared. She was lost in a flood of memories. Anthony at 7, insisting on helping in the store before school. Anthony carefully counting change, his little fingers moving quickly across the old cash register. Anthony solving math problems in his head while stocking shelves, amazing customers with his quick calculations. But this boy was different. Where Anthony's hair had been straight and brown, this child had tight black curls. Where Anthony's skin had been pale like hers, this boy's skin was a rich brown. Yet the similarity in their movements, in their careful attention to detail, was uncanny. Rose's hands began to tremble. Inside the store, the boy's mother called out to him, and he turned to respond. His smile, bright, confident, slightly crooked on the left side, was Anthony's smile. The same smile that now graced magazine covers and tech conferences, the smile of Boston's most successful entrepreneur. She watched as the boy pulled out a small notebook from his back pocket, scribbling something while looking at the fruit display. Just like Anthony used to do his calculations, figuring out how many oranges would fit in different display patterns. The boy's mother came into view, wearing a store manager's apron, looking at her son's notebook with pride. Rose found herself sinking onto the bench outside the store, her legs too weak to hold her up. In her mind, memories swirled like autumn leaves in a wind. Anthony mentioning something during his medical school days about donating to a fertility clinic to help pay for his books. Him saying it was his way of helping others while helping himself. She had almost forgotten about it. It was just a passing conversation over 20 years ago. But now, sitting on that bench, watching this boy who moved like her son, smiled like her son, and thought like her son, Rose Chen felt the hand of fate tapping her on the shoulder. She found herself wondering about possibilities she had never considered before, about connections that transcended the usual boundaries of family and chance. As the morning crowd began to filter into the store, Rose remained on that bench, her arthritic hands clutching her purse a little tighter, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew that pushing open that glass door would be more than just entering a store. It would be stepping into a mystery that could change multiple lives forever. Life above the corner store wasn't fancy, but it was home. The young boy sat at the kitchen table, his feet swinging above the floor as he worked on his math homework. Through the small window, the evening sun cast long shadows across his notebooks and the stack of library books he'd borrowed about renewable energy. His mom was still downstairs, finishing up the evening inventory. They lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled like fresh bread from the bakery next door. The walls were thin enough that he could hear Mr. Lee's Chinese soap operas from the apartment next door, but he didn't mind. The familiar sounds had become part of their home's heartbeat. Every afternoon after school, while other kids rushed to the playground or headed to expensive after-school programs, he would help out in the store. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He loved the way his mom's eyes lit up when he helped her organize the shelves, or when he quickly calculated discounts for elderly customers without using a calculator. The apartment might have been small, but his dreams were big. His favorite spot was by the window, where he'd spread out his science magazines and sketch designs for solar-powered cars and wind turbines. Sometimes, when business was slow, his mom would find him in the store, drawing complex diagrams on the back of old receipts. "Baby, what are you working on now?" she'd ask, running her fingers through his curly hair. "I'm designing a better way to store solar energy," he'd explain, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "See, if we can solve the storage problem, we can help people in places where they don't have electricity all the time." His mom worked hard, harder than anyone he knew. She'd started as a cashier 5 years ago and worked her way up to manager. Every night, she'd tell him stories about her own childhood dreams while they shared dinner at their small kitchen table. She'd wanted to be a botanist, but life had other plans. Now she made sure he had every opportunity to chase his own dreams. They didn't have much money for extras. His clothes came from the thrift store, and his mom would carefully repair any tears or loose buttons. But he never felt poor. His mom had taught him that wealth wasn't just about money. It was about how rich your mind was, how big your heart was, and how many people you helped along the way. The store had become his laboratory. He'd figured out the most efficient way to stack cans to use less shelf space. He created a system to track which fruits sold fastest in different weather. The regular customers loved him, often bringing him interesting science articles they'd cut from newspapers or magazines. That particular evening, as he worked on his homework, he didn't know he was being watched. He didn't notice the elderly woman who had been standing outside the store earlier, now sitting on the bench across the street, looking up at their apartment window. He was too absorbed in his calculations, trying to figure out how many solar panels it would take to power their entire building. His mom had always told him that sometimes the universe had a funny way of bringing the right people into your life at the right time. She'd say this whenever something unexpected happened, good or bad. "Everything happens for a reason," she'd tell him. "We just might not know the reason right away." Little did he know that the universe was about to prove his mom right in the most unexpected way. As he sat there, drawing his solar panel designs and dreaming of changing the world, forces were already in motion that would connect his simple life above the corner store to a world he couldn't even imagine. Down in the store, his mom was closing up for the night, unaware that tomorrow would bring a visitor who would change their lives forever. The elderly woman outside had finally gone home, but her discovery had set in motion a chain of events that would soon bridge two very different worlds. The boy yawned and looked at the clock. It was getting late, and tomorrow was another school day. He carefully put away his drawings and books, not knowing that his ordinary life was about to become extraordinary in ways he could never have calculated. For 3 days, Mrs. Rose Shen watched from afar, gathering her courage. Each morning, she'd sit on the bench across from the store, pretending to read her newspaper while watching the little boy help customers and arrange displays. Each day, her heart grew more certain of what she saw. On the 4th morning, she finally pushed open the store's glass door. The little bell above chimed softly, announcing her presence. The boy was kneeling by the cereal aisle, using a calculator to check his math as he marked down prices on clearance items. "Would you like some help finding anything?" he asked, looking up with those bright, intelligent eyes. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. The way he held his head slightly tilted, the careful way he placed the calculator down before standing. Every gesture echoed her son's childhood mannerisms. Yes," Rose said, her voice shakier than she'd intended. I'm looking for someone who can help me understand these prices. My eyes aren't what they used to be. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her vision had been getting worse, but that wasn't why she was there. The boy immediately brightened. I can help. I know all the prices, and I'm really good at calculating discounts. He pointed to the signs he'd been making. See, I figure out that if something is 30% off, you can multiply by 0.7 instead of doing the subtraction. It's faster. Rose felt her breath catch. Anthony had discovered the same shortcut at about the same age. She watched as the boy quickly calculated the discounted prices in his head, explaining his method with the same enthusiasm her son used to show. That's very impressive, she said softly. You remind me of someone I know, someone who also loves numbers and helping people. The boy's mother appeared from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes held a mixture of pride and protective concern as she watched the interaction. Can I help you with anything? She asked, moving closer to her son. Rose introduced herself, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm Rose Chen. I used to own a store much like this one, years ago. She paused, gathering her courage. My son, he used to do exactly what your boy does, arranging displays, helping customers, solving math problems in his head. The boy's mother relaxed slightly but remained attentive. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Chen. I'm the store manager. She placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. And this is my little mathematician. Over the next hour, as morning customers came and went, Rose found herself sharing stories about Anthony's childhood, his love for numbers, his dreams of changing the world, his determination to help others. With each story, she watched the boy's eyes grow wider, recognizing pieces of himself in her words. I want to change the world too, he exclaimed suddenly. I'm designing solar panels that can help people who don't have electricity. Want to see my drawings? Before his mother could stop him, he'd run upstairs and returned with his notebook. As he showed Rose his designs, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. The drawings, though done by a child's hand, showed the same innovative thinking, the same attention to detail that had made Anthony successful. He wants to make clean energy available to everyone, his mother explained, her voice soft with pride. He reads every science book he can get his hands on. Rose listened, her heart growing fuller with each word. She noticed how the boy's mother watched him with the same mixture of pride and protective love that she'd felt for Anthony. In that moment, she understood that whatever connection might exist between this boy and her son, it had to be handled with the utmost care and respect. As the morning wore on, Rose found herself pulling out her phone and showing them old pictures of Anthony at the same age, standing in their old store, arranging displays, working on his own childhood inventions. The similarities were undeniable, but it was more than just physical resemblance. It was the spark of brilliance, the genuine desire to help others, the pure joy in solving problems. The universe, it seemed, had orchestrated this meeting with careful precision. But as Rose watched the boy and his mother share a quick hug between customers, she knew that whatever came next would need to unfold just as carefully, with respect for the beautiful life they'd built together. Over the next few weeks, Rose became a regular at the corner store. She'd bring small treats, fresh baked cookies, or interesting science magazines she thought the boy might like. Sometimes she'd sit at the small table near the window, sharing stories with his mother while watching him work on his latest projects. One quiet afternoon, when the store was empty except for the three of them, Rose noticed the boy's mother looking at her with a thoughtful expression. They'd just watched him explain his latest idea about wind turbines to an impressed customer, using a pinwheel he'd made from recycled materials. Can I ask you something? His mother said softly, making sure her son was out of earshot as he restocked the shelves. Your son, you mentioned he went to medical school before becoming successful. Was that around 20 years ago? Rose's heart skipped a beat. Yes, she answered carefully. He graduated from Central Medical School, though he ended up pursuing his passion for renewable energy instead of practicing medicine. The boy's mother twisted her apron in her hands, a nervous habit Rose had noticed over their weeks of friendship. "I've been thinking a lot about something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I decided to have a baby, I went to the Hope Bridge Fertility Center. They had a program where medical students could donate to help pay for their education." Rose's hands began to tremble around her teacup. She remembered Anthony mentioning the program, how he'd felt it was a way to help others while managing his overwhelming student loans. The timing matched perfectly. "I chose my donor carefully," the boy's mother continued, looking over at her son, who was now completely absorbed in organizing the candy display. "I remember reading about how he was studying to be a doctor, but was passionate about renewable energy. How he wanted to make the world better. I chose him because his words showed such kindness and vision." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her apron. "I never expected. I mean, what are the chances? When you showed me those old pictures of your son, when you told me about his childhood, I kept thinking about all the similarities." Rose reached across the table and squeezed the younger woman's hand. Both of them sat in silence for a moment, watching the boy as he worked, unaware of the weight of their conversation. "I always knew he'd inherit his father's traits," his mother said with a small smile. "The doctors told me about genetic inheritance. But seeing it in person, hearing your stories about Anthony as a child, it's almost overwhelming." A customer walked in, and they quickly composed themselves. The boy rushed to help, showing the elderly man where to find the canned soup he was looking for, even offering to carry it to his car. "He had your kindness too," Rose said softly when the boy returned. "The way you've raised him. You've given him such a beautiful heart." His mother's eyes filled with tears again. "I never planned to look for the donor," she admitted. "The clinic promised anonymity, and I respected that. But now the universe has brought us together anyway," Rose finished for her. They watched as the boy pulled out his notebook, probably sketching another invention idea. "Does Anthony know?" his mother asked quietly. "About you coming here, about us?" Rose shook her head. "Not yet. I needed to be sure first. And more importantly, I needed to know if you would be okay with him knowing." The boy's mother looked at her son again, love and protection fighting a visible battle in her expression. "I never wanted to complicate his life," she said. "We're happy, just the two of us. But seeing how much of his father he has in him, maybe he deserves to know that part of himself too." As they sat there, watching the boy work, both women understood that their lives were about to change dramatically. The truth, hidden for so long in medical files and genetic codes, had found its way into the open through a chance encounter and a child's familiar smile. Rose sat in her living room, staring at her phone. The morning sun streamed through her curtains, casting gentle shadows on the family photos that lined her walls. Pictures of Anthony growing up, graduating, receiving awards, a whole lifetime of memories. And now, she was about to add another extraordinary chapter to their family story. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed Anthony's number. Despite his busy schedule running his clean energy empire, he always answered her calls. 3 rings later, his familiar voice came through. "Mom, is everything okay? You usually don't call this early." Rose took a deep breath. "I'm fine, dear, but I need to tell you something important. Something unexpected." There was a pause on the other end. She could picture him in his office, probably already dressed in one of his expensive suits, looking out over the city skyline. "What's going on, Mom? Do you remember, during medical school, when you participated in that donor program? The one at Hope Bridge Fertility Center?" The silence that followed told her he remembered. "Mom." His voice was careful, measured. "Why are you asking about that?" Rose told him everything. About seeing the boy in the store, about the uncanny similarities, about the conversations with his mother. As she spoke, She could hear Anthony's breathing getting heavier. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "I mean, what are the chances?" "The timing matches perfectly," Rose explained. "And Anthony, if you could see him. He's brilliant with numbers, just like you were. He spends his free time designing solar panels and wind turbines. He even does that thing you used to do, arranging store displays like they're engineering projects." Another long pause. "Does he know about me?" "No," Rose said softly. "His mother, and I thought you should know first. She's been wonderful, Anthony. She's raised him to be kind, thoughtful, and so incredibly bright." She heard him take a shaky breath. "I never thought. When I did that program, it was just to help pay for school. I mean, I hoped whoever used it would be happy, but I never imagined." "He wants to change the world," Rose said, smiling through her tears. "Just like you did at his age. He has your smile, your way of thinking, even your little habits. The universe has a funny way of bringing things full circle, doesn't it?" "What do they want?" Anthony asked, his voice careful. "Money? Recognition?" "Nothing," Rose said firmly. "They don't want anything from you. They have a beautiful life together. His mother just thought, well, we both thought you should know. He's growing up to be so much like you, it felt wrong to keep it a secret." The sound of paper shuffling came through the phone. "I need to think about this, Mom. It's a lot to process. I mean, I have a son. A son who's apparently a mini-me, designing renewable energy solutions in a corner store." "Take all the time you need," Rose said gently. "But Anthony, he's amazing. And his mother has done such a wonderful job raising him. Whatever you decide, just know that." "Send me a picture," Anthony said suddenly. If that's okay. I'd like to see him." Rose pulled up the photo she'd taken last week, the boy proudly showing off his latest pinwheel design, his smile bright and familiar. She sent it to Anthony and heard his sharp intake of breath when it arrived. That's exactly how I used to look," he whispered. Except he has his mother's beautiful brown skin and curly hair," Rose finished. "But that smile, those eyes, pure you." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. Finally, Anthony spoke again, his voice thick with feeling. "I need a few days, Mom, to think about what this means, what I should do." "Of course," Rose replied. "They're not going anywhere. Just keep your heart open, okay? Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places." As she hung up the phone, Rose looked at the morning sun now fully streaming through her window. She said a quiet prayer that the same universe that had brought them all together would guide them through whatever came next. 3 days after the phone call, Anthony sat in his penthouse office, staring at the photo on his phone for the 100th time. The boy's smile haunted him. It was like looking at an old photograph of himself, but in vibrant color and a different shade of skin. He barely slept since his mother's call, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. His assistant knocked on the door, reminding him about his next meeting. "Cancel it," he said, surprising himself. "Cancel everything for today." He needed time to think, to process, to decide what to do with this life-changing information. Meanwhile, at the corner store, the boy's mother was having her own struggles. Every time the bell above the door chimed, her heart jumped, wondering if it would be Anthony walking in. She watched her son more closely these days, seeing new similarities she hadn't noticed before. The way he chewed his lip when concentrating, how he used his hands when explaining things. "Mom," the boy called out that afternoon, "why does Mrs. Chen keep looking at me like that? Like she's going to cry." His mother's heart tightened. She'd noticed Rose's tearful glances too. "She just thinks you're very special," she answered carefully. But she knew they couldn't keep dancing around the truth forever. Her son was too smart, too observant. That evening, after closing the store, she sat on their worn couch, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The boy was asleep in his room, surrounded by his books and drawings. She pulled out an old folder from beneath her bed, the paperwork from the fertility clinic. She'd kept it all these years, occasionally reading through the donor's profile, seeing those same traits emerge in her son. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rose. Anthony wants to meet him. The words made her hands shake. This was what she'd both hoped for and feared. Her son had always been curious about where he came from, but she'd built a good life for them. It was simple, but it was filled with love and purpose. What would knowing his father was a billionaire do to him? Would it make him feel less proud of their little apartment above the store? Less satisfied with their modest life? Across town, Rose was facing her own dilemma. She sat in her garden, remembering how Anthony had played there as a child, building contraptions out of old garden tools. Now there was another little boy with that same creative spirit, that same brilliant mind. But unlike Anthony, who'd grown up with every advantage, this child was being raised on a store manager's salary. Her phone rang. It was Anthony. "Mom," his voice was tired, stressed. "I don't know if I should do this. What if I mess up his life? What if knowing about me changes everything for him? Or what if it gives him something beautiful?" Rose countered gently. "He's already so much like you. Maybe knowing where that comes from would help him understand himself better." Back at the store, the boy's mother was cleaning up when she found one of his notebooks left on the counter. Opening it, she found pages of calculations and drawings, but also questions scribbled in the margins. Why am I good at math? Where did I get my brain from? Does my dad like inventing too? Her eyes filled with tears. She'd always told him that his father was someone special who helped her have a baby. But as he grew older, she knew he had more questions. Questions that now had answers if she was brave enough to let them in. The next morning, Rose came to the store earlier than usual. She found the boy's mother arranging the morning deliveries, her movements automatic while her mind was clearly elsewhere. "My son is scared," Rose said softly, helping to unpack a box of cereal. "He's worried about disrupting your lives." "I'm scared too," the mother admitted, straightening boxes that were already straight. "We're happy. We're good. But—" she looked toward the stairs where her son was still sleeping. "Sometimes I see him looking at other kids with their dads. Sometimes he asks questions I can't fully answer." They worked in silence for a while, both women thinking about the little boy sleeping upstairs and the man across town who shared his DNA. The morning sun began to peek through the store windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "Whatever we decide," the mother finally said, "it has to be what's best for him. Not for us, not for Anthony, but for my son." Rose nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes the hardest decisions weren't about right or wrong, but about finding the courage to open doors that could never be closed again. The boy sat in the principal's office, staring at his shoes. His mother had been called from the store because he'd gotten into a fight during recess, something that had never happened before. He wasn't a fighter. He was the kid who solved problems with math and science. He punched Tommy in the nose, the principal explained gently to his mother when she arrived, still wearing her store apron. When we asked why, he wouldn't say. But the truth was burning in the boy's throat. Tommy had been bragging about his dad taking him to a science museum. "My dad works with solar panels," Tommy had said proudly. "He's teaching me all about renewable energy." Something had snapped inside the boy. All the whispered conversations he'd overheard between his mom and Mrs. Chen. All the strange looks and sudden silences when he walked into the room. It all came bubbling up. Before he knew it, his fist was flying. At home that evening, he sat at their kitchen table, his untouched dinner getting cold. His mother watched him with worried eyes, seeing the storm brewing behind his usually bright expression. "Baby," she said softly, "want to tell me what really happened today?" He pushed his peas around his plate. "Why do you and Mrs. Chen whisper all the time? Why does she look at me like that? Why won't anyone tell me what's going on? His mother's hand froze halfway to her water glass. What do you mean? I heard you talking about someone named Anthony. About him being like me when he was little. About him maybe wanting to meet me. The words tumbled out in a rush. Is he my dad? The silence in their small kitchen felt heavy enough to touch. His mother's eyes filled with tears, and he instantly felt guilty for making her cry. But he couldn't stop now. The other kids, they all know where they came from. They know why they're good at some things and bad at others. But I just have questions. His voice cracked, and nobody will answer them. In his bedroom later that night, he pulled out all his notebooks, the ones filled with drawings of solar panels and wind turbines. He'd always been proud of how his brain worked, how he could see solutions that others couldn't. But now it felt different. Like maybe these weren't really his ideas at all. Like maybe they belonged to someone else. The next day at school, he didn't raise his hand in math class, even though he knew all the answers. During lunch, he sat alone, not working on his usual inventions. His teacher noticed and called his mother. He seems withdrawn, the teacher explained. He didn't even want to help with the science experiment today. That's not like him at all. His mother watched him that afternoon in the store. He mechanically stocked shelves, no longer turning it into a math game like he usually did. When a customer asked for help with calculations, he just pointed to the calculator by the register. My little inventor isn't inventing today. Mrs. Chen asked gently when she came in for her usual visit. He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. Maybe I should just focus on normal kid stuff instead. That evening, his mother found all the science magazines stuffed in the recycling bin. His beloved notebook of inventions was crumpled in the trash. When she pulled it out and smoothed the pages, her heart broke seeing all his beautiful drawings crossed out. She sat on the edge of his bed that night, watching him pretend to sleep. You know, she said quietly, the best parts of you. Your kindness, your creativity, your big heart. Those come from being you, not from anyone else. He rolled over, his eyes shining with tears in the darkness. But what if? What if I'm only good at things because of him? What if none of it is really me? His mother pulled him into a tight hug, feeling his small body shake with sobs. She realized that in trying to protect him, they'd created a void that he was filling with doubts and fears. The time for whispered conversations and careful secrets had passed. Across town, Anthony sat in his office, staring at his phone. Rose had just texted him about the boys' trouble at school. Looking around at his empire of solar panels and wind farms, he suddenly realized that success meant nothing if he couldn't help this child, his child, understand that he was perfect exactly as he was. The store was quiet that evening after closing. Only the hum of the refrigerators and the soft ticking of the old wall clock broke the silence. The boy's mother had closed early, putting up a sign that said, "Family Emergency" on the door. Her hands trembled as she wiped down the counter for the 10th time. Are you sure about this? She asked Rose, who stood nearby arranging and rearranging a display of fruit, her own nervous energy showing. Before Rose could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Anthony stood there, looking nothing like the billionaire CEO whose picture appeared in business magazines. He wore simple jeans and a sweater, his hair slightly messy from running his fingers through it too many times. In his hands, he clutched an old notebook, one he'd kept from when he was a child. The boy sat at the small table near the window, surrounded by his own notebooks and drawings that his mother had rescued from the trash. He looked up when the door opened, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Anthony's breath caught in his throat. The pictures hadn't prepared him for this moment. Seeing the boy in person, seeing his own childhood reflected in those bright, curious eyes, made his heart feel too big for his chest. "Hi," Anthony said softly, his usually confident voice barely a whisper. The boy didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at his drawings, then back at Anthony, then at his mother, questions filling his eyes. Anthony moved closer, noticing the solar panel designs spread across the table. His hands shaking slightly, he opened his old notebook and placed it next to the boy's drawings. On the yellowed pages were sketches that could have been drawn by the same hand, similar designs, similar notes in the margins, even similar ways of showing measurements. "When I was your age," Anthony said, his voice growing steadier, "I used to drive my teachers crazy with all my questions about renewable energy. Nobody really took it seriously back then." The boy's eyes widened as he looked at the old drawings. You liked inventing things too." Anthony nodded, pulling up a chair. "I turned our garage into a workshop. My mom, your grandmother Rose over there, she used to worry I'd blow up the house with my experiments." A small smile tugged at the boy's lips. "Mom says the same thing when I work on my projects in the kitchen." His mother watched from behind the counter, tears in her eyes, as her son and his father began comparing notes. Anthony pointed to one of the boy's designs. "This part here," he said, tapping the paper, "that's really clever. I never thought of using that angle for the panels. It would catch more morning sun." The boy sat up straighter, his earlier doubts starting to fade. "Really? I thought maybe. Maybe I was just copying things without knowing it." Anthony shook his head firmly. "These are your ideas, your inventions. Being good at something, being passionate about making the world better, that's not just about DNA. It's about who you choose to be." He pulled something else from his bag, a small solar-powered device he'd made when he was 12. "This was my first working invention," he said, placing it on the table. "It only powered a tiny light bulb, but I was so proud of it." The boy reached out hesitantly to touch it. "Did it help you become successful?" Anthony glanced at the boy's mother, choosing his words carefully. "Success isn't just about money or big companies. It's about following your dreams and using them to help others. Your mom taught you that, didn't she?" The boy nodded, smiling at his mother. "She says we're rich in all the ways that matter." "She's absolutely right," Anthony said softly. "And she's done an amazing job raising you to be thoughtful and kind and brilliant." They spent the next hour going through both their notebooks, sharing ideas and improvements. The boy's earlier withdrawal had vanished, replaced by excitement as he explained his latest projects. His mother and Rose watched, wiping away tears, as two generations of inventors connected over their shared passion. When the boy ran upstairs to get more of his drawings, Anthony turned to his mother. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving him everything I couldn't. For making him into someone so wonderful." The boy's footsteps thundered back down the stairs, his arms full of more notebooks, his eyes shining with renewed purpose. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and newfound connections, waiting to be explored one page at a time. 6 months had passed since that evening in the store. The spring sunshine warmed the sidewalk where the boy sat with his mother, both enjoying ice cream cones from the new parlor down the street. Life had changed, but not in the ways anyone had expected. The little apartment above the store was still their home. The boy's mother had firmly refused Anthony's offer to move them to a bigger place. "Our happiness isn't measured in square feet," she told him, and he'd understood. Instead, they'd focused on building something more valuable than material wealth, a genuine connection. Every Wednesday afternoon, Anthony would come to the store, not in his expensive car, but walking from the subway station like any other dad. He'd sit at the small table by the window with his son, sharing ideas and working on projects together. Sometimes they'd spend hours just drawing and calculating, their heads bent over notebooks, looking so alike despite their different colors that it made Rose's heart swell with joy. The boy's mother watched as her son flourished with this new understanding of himself. His grades, already excellent, had somehow gotten even better. But more importantly, his smile had returned, bigger and brighter than ever. The crisis of identity that had troubled him had transformed into a quiet confidence. "Mom," He'd said one evening while helping her close the store, "Is it okay that I'm happy having two different kinds of family? One that's rich in money and one that's rich in love." She'd hugged him tight, thankful for his wise little heart. "That just means you're twice as blessed, baby." Anthony had kept his promise to respect their independence. Instead of grand gestures or expensive gifts, he focused on being present. He showed up for school science fairs, beaming with pride as his son explained his inventions to judges. He helped with homework, shared stories about his own childhood struggles, and most importantly, he listened. Rose had found her role too, becoming the bridge between two worlds. She still came to the store almost daily, but now she brought old photo albums and shared stories about Anthony's childhood with both mother and son. These stories helped them all understand how the past had shaped their present. The DNA test results had confirmed what their hearts already knew, but that paper seemed less important than the bonds they were building day by day. The boy had Anthony's brilliant mind for innovation, but he had his mother's gentle spirit and kind heart. It was a combination that made him uniquely himself. One sunny afternoon, as they all gathered in the store's back room for their weekly family dinner, a tradition the boy's mother had started, Anthony shared some news. "Remember that solar panel design you showed me last month?" he asked his son. "The one with the special angle for morning sun?" The boy nodded, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Well, I had our engineers look at it. They think it could work. Would you like to help us develop it?" The boy's eyes lit up, but then he looked at his mother uncertainly. She smiled and nodded. "Your ideas deserve to fly, baby. Just remember to keep your feet on the ground." That moment captured the essence of their new normal, finding balance between two worlds, between dreams and reality, between the past and the future. Later that evening, as the setting sun painted the store windows in gold, the boy worked on his homework while his mother handled the last customers of the day. Rose arranged flowers in a vase near the window, and Anthony reviewed some business documents at their usual table. A customer walked in and smiled at the scene. "What a beautiful family," she said to no one in particular. They all exchanged glances, warm smiles spreading across their faces. Because that's what they had become, not through obligation or expectation, but through choice and love and understanding. The boy pulled out his notebook, starting a fresh page for new ideas. At the top, he wrote a title, "Family-Powered Solar Solutions." Below it, he began to sketch, adding notes in the margins just like his father used to do. But these weren't just his father's traits anymore. They were his own, part of the unique person he was becoming. Outside, the city hummed with life, and inside the little corner store, a family that had been brought together by chance continued writing their own unique story, one page at a time.